Hi, everyone. Good morning. We're going to be talking about responding to uncomfortable situations. I'm going to remind you throughout that if you'd like to ask a question or share an experience that you don't want to share with everyone, you can specifically choose to send questions to Cindy or to another member of the conference hosts to ask your question. I know this can be a tricky topic sometimes. So let's get started. So oftentimes we're caught off guard by inappropriate comments that are made by patrons or colleagues, and we're not prepared to respond appropriately. So we're going to go over several scenarios where someone behaves in a way that is not acceptable in the library. And we're going to talk about responses that you can use. Many of these responsibles are professionally phrased responses, but you can use them in your personal life as well. And you can soften them a little bit depending on who you're talking to.
And before we get started, I just wanted to go over a few terms in case you're unfamiliar with them. And they kind of start off more unintentional and build as we go down. So a microaggression is a brief, everyday, sometimes unintentional message that sends certain messages to certain individuals because of their group membership. This is often not seen in a positive light. For example, asking someone if they're from this country. An incivility are low intensity, ambiguous, negative workplace behaviors that can lead to bullying. And then workplace bullying in particular, repeated and persistent interpersonal aggression or antisocial behavior towards another. This doesn't include just having a disagreement with someone. I think a lot of people often confuse having a disagreement with someone for, being aggressive in any way. And of course, people can come across as aggressive. But an example of this is gossiping about a coworker. Mobbing a group of people, emotionally abusing and bullying an individual. And harassment, behavior that demeans, humiliates, or embarrasses a person and/or behavior that appears to be disturbing, upsetting, or threatening. If you're not sure about any of these, then you could always just open up the channels for clear communication, ask, and hopefully just by asking and being open, you aren't in the more aggressive territory.
Okay. So, not quite sure why there are some marks on the screen. If I'm the only one who can see those, that's strange, but we'll continue. So 80% of women and 55% of men have experienced sexual harassment from customers on a monthly basis. That's a lot. But there are many other types of harassment that we experience. So if you are comfortable putting a yes or a no in the comments field, please go ahead and tell us if you've ever experienced any type of harassment from a customer or a colleague, not just sexual harassment.
Ooh, those numbers are going up.
I'm watching the little blip at the bottom of the screen for your comments, and it just says yes, 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 yes. So you can see how prevalent this is. And because of all of your yeses, I saw one no, I'm glad to hear that. Because of all of your yeses, it's more validation for us about why this presentation is so important. This isn't the first time we've presented it, and it won't be the last. I'm getting ready to share it with my team at my newest library here in Chesterfield as well. And to kind of backtrack a little bit, Emily, why don't we tell them a little bit about why we decided to make this presentation? So Emily and I worked together for several years, a couple of years ago, and we had a lot of younger staff, and those staff members were subject to a lot of sexual harassment. I felt like it was a lot. She probably did too. Others might not, but
well, any I think is a lot.
Any is a lot, but they had no idea how to respond to the things that were happening. Love letters, asking for their phone number, following them to their car, like those things only happen like once each, but that seemed like a lot. So you'll see some examples in here. Every one of these examples happened, and they are things that one of us had to respond to, or we supervised someone who responded to. So we realized that we needed to empower our teams to respond You will also see in these slides that we have the Campbell County HR policy at the bottom of some of them. We chose to leave those in to give you some examples. Someone said it's difficult to hear us. Okay, let me try. I'm gonna try to just speak up because I can't get much closer to my screen. Here we go. Okay, hopefully this is better. And then once the recording is done, you can also turn up your sound. So we decided to leave the HR policies in here for you to get an idea of what we were working with in Campbell and what we were supported by. Well, we could turn off our cameras and the sound might get longer or higher. Cindy, do you want us to turn off our cameras or everyone else?
I just thought if you wanted to get closer, you said something about if you were too close to the screen, then your face would be really up at the camera. I thought if you just turn your cameras off, you could get closer without having to worry about that. That's all.
Okay. Well, let me know, everyone, if you can hear us well or not, and then we'll base it off of that. Okay. No audio issues. I can hear fine. Okay. So for anyone who's having trouble, if you need to go back and watch the recording again, it's always good to rewatch things. You learn something new every time you hear it. You can turn up the sound. So back to the HR policies, we all have HR departments and we all have policies, and you're going to want to refer to those often. All right. Next slide, Emily. Okay. So this is big and this is bold. And this is the biggest thing to remember. It's okay to respond. You should respond. And you have every right to stand up for yourself, your colleagues, and your customers. So the things that we're going to equip you with, the sayings, they're short, they're to the point, they're impactful, and hopefully they will make you feel empowered to say something in the moment. I will be totally honest here and say that I don't always know how to respond in the moment to things. As we prepared this, and then I went back after 2.5, 3 years and looked at it, it definitely helped me. And I have used some of these responses in recent months. We started looking at this a couple months ago, and it reminded me like, oh wait, I have this in my toolbox and I should be using it more. So I've even gone back and used it.
As long as you are being respectful in your communication, you are allowed and you should stand up for yourself and say something.
And if all you needed to hear today was us validating that you are allowed to respond, then I walk away happy. So a couple things to remember with these two is that, oops, Emily, go back. I have no. Okay, so remember that you can use these things outside of the workplace. But again, you want to tailor those, keep it respectful, but you can also lighten those comments a little bit depending on who it is. And also remember your nonverbal communication. That will definitely make a difference. So my biggest thing with this is empowering my team to respond and equipping them with all the necessary tools and encouraging you though to get your manager when it's necessary. You will see a ton of comments throughout here that says what your first response should be. But then if your first response didn't work, go at your supervisor. They are there to support you. And if you don't feel supported by your supervisor, then you need to speak with HR. That's my soapbox. Go ahead, Emily. Okay, so we're going to go back and forth. One of us is going to read the situation. The other one's going to respond. Okay, so a patron is harassing a staff member and or other patrons. So this example actually happened, and I believe it happened to Emily. So she was asked she had another patron asked to take pictures of them posing in the restroom.
Yes, like Dana said, all of these are real things that have happened to us or someone we work closely with. The response is that's inappropriate and I need you to stop. And then if it continues, you can always bounce it to a manager. In case you're not a manager, I'm happy to find a manager to discuss this with you. Or if it is incredibly harassing behavior, if it's really, affecting the whole library dynamic at that point, if this behavior continues, I will ask you to leave the library. We have support for all of these situations. in our patron policy manual, which is approved by our board. And so I put that specific section here under the response. This did happen. Someone asked another employee to do that. They told me about it afterwards, and I said, well, did you tell them no? No, I didn't. That's not great. But yeah, like Cindy said, focus on the behavior and not the person in any of this. Next situation. A staff member is getting ready to leave for the day and notices a patron waiting by her car.
So I had this happen to a young staff member. Had I known about it when it first happened, because I found out the next day, then I would have given them the first option here, which is, you know, if that's uncomfortable for you, then a colleague can walk you to your car. Now, if you notice though, you will see law enforcement in some of our second responses, because if you feel unsafe or there are customers who are unsafe, you have every right to call law enforcement. And that is something that I'm very happy. We have a very strong support from our administration here in Chesterfield County for this very thing. We have reminded our teams as well, you don't need to go ask a manager to call law enforcement. Now, obviously check with your system on their procedures for this. But if you feel in the moment that you need law enforcement, you call them. That is what they're there for. Now that might vary depending on if you call 911 or a local non-emergency phone number. And that's something you would want to clarify with your manager. Now, this particular situation, I encouraged this staff member to come back into the library if this happened again, find their supervisor, and then decide together if you need to call law enforcement. Now, I do say decide together because a supervisor might suggest law enforcement and a staff member might believe that this type of behavior is okay and it won't escalate, or vice versa. But there's always potential for escalation in situations like this. So it's better to err on the side of caution and call your non-emergency police number if this type of behavior continues.
Here's another situation. Similar vein, a patron verbally or physically threatens another patron or library staff member.
So this one has always rubbed me the wrong way because the safety of my team and my customers in my community is very, very important to me, and I'm sure it is to you as well. So your first response can be, that behavior is not okay. I'm going to ask you to leave the library for the day. The first response here is to leave the library for the day because this is a threat and this is a safety concern. If this is a customer that this has never happened with before, then your first response is very appropriate because it might never happen again. You don't know what that person's experiencing right now. You're focusing on their behavior because you don't know what happened to them before they walked into your library. And I am sure you have heard that many, many times throughout your trainings, to focus on the behavior and to really keep in mind you don't know what's going on in their life. Or, probably, someone cut them off while they were driving there and they were just in a bad mood, been there, done that. But secondly, if your customer does not comply, then you need to call law enforcement. There is a safety concern there. I thought I saw a comment. So, excuse me. So like I said, you will see law enforcement throughout this presentation. And even though you might be well-versed in these firm statements to customers, they don't always stop the behavior. All right. I hope none of you have ever had to experience this. Fortunately, one of us has. A staff member walks in on a patron pleasuring himself.
So this happened as I was about to go into I'm going to be really discouraged to see a lot of, a lot of people. This happened when I was trying to go into a room for a meeting and there was a teen in the corner and I made the mistake of, without assessing the situation, I said, "Oh, do you need a hand with something?" And that happened. I walked out of the room, very uncomfortable. In the moment, I was just like, all right, there's the door. I'm gonna walk over here, but please, please, please know that you can say, that's not okay. I'm gonna have to ask you to leave for the day. And then if this is a repeating offense, you can call law enforcement. I didn't know at the time, which it's always evolving, but that is harassment, that someone was doing that in public, and that anyone could walk in. So just know you can say that's not okay. You got to, hit the bricks. Probably not like that though.
Okay. And I will say, many of these situations we encountered very quickly in our careers. Campbell County was, for both of us, one of our first professional positions, and we were in management very quickly, and we learned these things very quickly. So I am definitely very proud of what we have learned from that, and the support that we had from both of our directors. We've worked for 2 directors, and they were both wonderful with these things. So we presented this at a staff day, and it was very supportive. So, okay, a patron has asked for the contact information of another patron, because who does that? Emily?
We can rely on the ALA for this, for the Library Bill of Rights, and say, unfortunately, we can't divulge that information due to our confidentiality policy. If you wanted to make it a little softer, make it more customer servicey, you can say, oh, well, I can set you up as an authorized borrower on their account. They just need to call, come in, let us know. I had this a lot when I started at a branch in a small town. A lot of people were more used to, well, I have no harm, I have no bad intentions. This is, someone I'm close with, my neighbor, I just want to pick up their books for them. Still, that's not okay. And we had to come down a bit, and people weren't super happy about it. But you can always twist this to, that isn't okay. Here's what we can do to make sure that the situation gets resolved.
Which is also something I'm sure many of you have heard in other trainings and conversations, is what can you do? So you'll see that a few times throughout here as well. All right, a patron has asked for the contact information of a staff member. This happens more often than I thought it would.
Same thing. We can't divulge patron information or staff information. I always turned around, they're not available right now. Is there something I can help you with? Or you could even ask if they're comfortable giving their contact information so that you can pass it along. This is another thing that in this small town situation I was in, it was, oh, well, that person recommended something to me. I just wanted to check with her and let her know the recipe was great or something like that. You just don't know what someone's intentions are, and it's better to be safe than sorry. And just really make sure that you're protecting not only the patrons, but also your fellow coworkers. A patron is watching obscene material on a library computer, for example, pornography.
And considering your responses to the harassment question, I will just assume that this is something that we have all had to deal with more than once. So you have some options based on the technology that you have and based on your internal policies and procedures. So some systems you do still have to walk up to them and say, excuse me, I'm going to need you to turn that off. That kind of content's against our usage policy. Or you might have seen when you logged into your computer that there was a user agreement that included acceptable use. Now, we all know most people just click through those because it's a lot of words. I have read through a few of them, and they are pretty specific. So in Campbell County, we have this option under the messaging system to include this little message. So not everyone is comfortable walking up to someone. And we did not always have a manager or a full-time staff member available to handle this type of situation. So we had this, this message taped to a spot right next to the computer that had this software so that they could go ahead and send this. Anyone could. And it says the images you're reviewing violate the library's accessible internet use policy that's outlined in the pin screen when you log in. By logging in, you agree to these conditions. Your computer session will now automatically be terminated. You may not use any of our library computers for the rest of the day. Multiple infractions may result in being barred permanently from library computer use. Thank you for respecting our policies as well as other library patrons who may accidentally view your screen in passing. So this is something, excuse me, I was just reading a comment here. I'm going to read that in just a moment. So if someone's not comfortable, they can put this in the message. This is a very discreet way to call out a behavior and give the customer a chance to close their browser before calling attention to themselves. This could be the first time that they've tested this boundary, and they may be so embarrassed that they will just close it and go about their business. They might close it and decide to just leave the library. So it's an opportunity for both of you. And now if the behavior continues, then there are situations where you have to go get a manager to have a discussion with a customer. Now, this is something I had to do, and we decided to include this example as an added example of thinking through safety. So we've learned through each one of these experiences and what we did correctly and what we did not. This is a situation I did not handle correctly, and I put myself in a situation that could have been more dangerous. So I had a customer who would repeatedly look at things that were inappropriate. We had talked to him. It continued. It got to the point where he was only allowed on a computer that was facing the desk. So, and his response was very different, and I didn't expect it. So he saw me as the person who was keeping him in check from an addiction. So that was something I struggled with learning how to respond to. Now, when I finally had to talk to him, I took him into a meeting room to talk to him because I was cognizant of his privacy so that other customers didn't see me talking to him about this. But because of the way my desk and my office was laid out, I had already thought about I shouldn't bring him into my office for safety reasons. Now, the room I took him into, though, from the desk, no one could see me and no one could see him. So I learned very quickly, as I was speaking to him, I realized I was not in a good situation and that I chose poorly. Now, this person turned out to be very nice about it, and it was an odd conversation because he didn't quite see how, he understood this was something he shouldn't be doing, but he saw me as a savior to him to stop him. Now, thankfully, he did decide to stop coming to the library, to this branch. I know he went to other branches for a while. He banned himself for a couple of months, which was interesting. But it really got me thinking about the situations that we put ourselves in that we don't realize at the time could be unsafe. And those are things that I'm all about sharing with others so that you might think about one of those examples before you get ready to have a conversation with a customer.
And something a few people in the chat have mentioned is that in their libraries that is allowed, in which case you can redirect them to, a few people have said more private computers,
Right.
But just being able to say, go up to them and say, I'm sorry, I see what you're looking at. Can you please move over here? All right. On a similar vein, a patron is upset that another patron is viewing certain content, even though that content is not obscene and/or pornographic.
So this can happen with a customer or a staff member. I've had both of those occur, and my message to them has been the same. The examples that I have would be like highly suggestive art or nude sculptures, and you can respond to both in this way. You know, are obscene and pornographic materials filtered? Patrons are permitted to use the public computers as long as they follow the acceptable use policy. So the content that this particular patron is viewing is not is considered acceptable use. And you don't have to get into much more detail than that. Okay. A patron is staring at the computer screen of another patron and makes them feel uncomfortable.
So to the person who's staring, I like to go up, or if they're doing anything that just is kind of unusual in the library sphere, I go up and ask if they need some help with anything. They might not know that what they're doing is offensive. They might not know that what they're doing makes someone else feel uncomfortable. They might not be that aware. And it's better to offer that service of, can I help you find something? Do you need help with something? Just to better understand the situation.
Yeah, I'm going to go into the comments here. There were a couple that I wanted to mention. So someone said, sometimes it's best to approach patrons with another coworker The libraries that we both worked in together were small libraries. So if we had to approach someone, the people at the desk could see what was going on, heard what was going on. So we were all very aware. But in some of the libraries that I've worked at that are bigger, we do go together. I have had situations where we've gone together where someone will come up and they'll stand a few feet away off to the side. That is something I learned from Ryan Dowd's homelessness training. And if you have not taken that training, it is 8 hours. If your state library has access to it, I highly recommend it. If they don't, I recommend that you put in a request for them to get access to it. So thank you, Cindy, because I know that is something many librarians in Virginia have taken, and I've learned so much from that, and that is one of them. Now, another person said they use that response with customers complaining about one another, and they move the complaining customer to another computer, which is always a great response because the other person that they're complaining about is not the one that is doing anything wrong. Neither one of them is doing anything wrong, but it's always good to just move that person. Yes, no one approaches alone. I'm so glad to see someone said they have security officers and police. We do have one library in Chesterfield County that does have an officer for certain hours of the day, but that is something that not all libraries have. Someone said their whole staff took the Ryan Dowd training. Ryan Dowd, it's a homelessness training, and if you reach out to your state library, they might have it. Librarian's Guide to Homelessness. Thank you, Cindy. Cindy said 1,200 librarians in Virginia took it. I'm so proud of that. That's awesome. All right. I guess we probably should update this presentation, Emily, to include some of Ryan's suggestions because they're gold. Okay. A patron or coworker makes an inappropriate joke or statement that makes you feel uncomfortable. This kind of thing happens all the time. I mean, if you want to put some yeses in the comment box, I know that they'll just go.
And it's a very personal thing, what you feel comfortable with or uncomfortable with. I don't know if anyone else, all the time. I don't know if anyone else has read Crucial Conversations. It's a wonderful book. I highly recommend it because it sets you up for success in having these kinds of conversations with others. But just using the I feel statements, like your comment makes me uncomfortable, that can kind of kick something in someone's head of, oh, I didn't intend that. And then they can, continue on.
Thank you, Emily, for mentioning those I feel statements. I didn't know very much about those statements until this past year, and I feel like I've grown as an adult. But there is a formula to those. It's I feel an emotion when you an action because this is how it makes me feel. It's very impactful, personally and professionally. Put that out there.
Oh yeah.
Let's get back on track.
Okay, a patron or coworker raises their voice to you.
So before I became a librarian, while I was in library school, I worked for a call center. And I highly recommend that everyone spend a couple months in a call center because you learn so much about communication. And I often say that I can handle just about anything over the phone. I can handle any amount of yelling, screaming, complaining, all of it, because we had some interesting situations when I was on the call center. But it definitely helped me with this. So your responses should remain at a normal volume or speak lower. The lower you get, the lower they have to get because otherwise they're not going to be able to hear you. And as you do that and they lower their voice, then they calm down and they can hear you as you're talking to them, and that helps dissolve the situation. So very pointedly, you can say, I'd be glad to discuss this with you if you can refrain from raising your voice. Now that's the very professional response. I will be honest, in the call center, I was known to tell people, if you don't stop cursing at me, I'm gonna hang up on you. And then I'll have a supervisor stand up and go, you okay over there? But I was always able to diffuse the situation. Now I've learned, in over 10 years, I've learned that it's more appropriate, to acknowledge to them that you are open to having this discussion with them if they're able to refrain from raising their voice.
All right. A patron or coworker touches you inappropriately or engages in any unwarranted contact with you, including a pat on the arm or a hug.
So this is something, now this is a patron or coworker, but this can happen in many different types of places, and you might not be comfortable responding depending on the position of the person who does it. So I want to remind you that one, it is okay to respond and you can do so respectfully. And if you are not comfortable, go get your supervisor. This is part of what they do, is take care of their team. If it is a colleague that does this, you definitely need to report it to your supervisor. But you have every right to say, that makes me uncomfortable. I'd prefer if you didn't do that. You can step to the side so that it's a very non-aggressive type of response, just stepping to the side that I'm uncomfortable with that. So please don't do that. If it continues, then you definitely need to report it to your supervisor. If your supervisor is the one engaging in this, then you need to go to your human resources. This says to go to PER because that is the acronym for Human Resources in Campbell County. Emily, I can't remember what it stands for.
Public and Employee Relations.
Let me just look here. I had one other thing I wanted to say about this. Oh, the other thing about this is this does fall under sexual harassment and it needs to be reported. You can say, please don't put your arm around me. That makes me uncomfortable. You know, if this behavior continues, I will go get my supervisor to finish assisting you. And then something, go ahead.
I was going to move on to the next one.
Oh, we get ahead of ourselves here and like to, Emily and I work so well together. I love it. I had one more point here and I'm just reading it to make sure that it sounds like I needed it to. Right, so continued behavior results in a conversation with your supervisor or a higher manager. So you want to refer to your code of conduct. So you can say, please help us in creating a comfortable environment by refraining from any action or activity that would disturb others and their use of the library. And that includes staff.
And I was just grimacing because Aaron had a bad situation. The next situation, a patron or coworker threatens you, even if it appears to be a joke.
I will just comment also on Erin's. She said it's so easy to just shut down. But in the moment, it's not so easy sometimes. So the first time you do it, or the second time, because I mean, let's be honest here, it happens and it's going to continue, it will get easy.
Well, I think she was saying that in the moment, it's very easy to just shut down yourself and not be able to.
I read that wrong. Okay. Completely understandable, Erin. Yes, I'm sorry, I read that wrong. Another attendee said a customer kissed them. I am so sorry that happened to you. I worked in a place where someone kissed me on the forehead and my boss who owned the company physically threw the person out and I never felt more supportive or supported. I hope you received support from your higher managers and your HR. And that is harassment. And had someone come to me and said, I just had a customer kiss me and I slapped them, I would have been like, go you, now we need to call the police. So thank you for being so vulnerably honest with sharing that with us. I'm sorry that you did not receive the support that you deserved. Okay, patron threatens you or a coworker and appears to be a joke. Your comment makes me uncomfortable. Shut it down. Said shut it down several times as we've talked about this presentation recently. And if that doesn't work, report it. That is something, Emily, you can probably speak to this a little better than I can. But this is where you might see more of those types of microaggressions because people think it's a joke when it's not.
Yeah.
Emily, do you want to say more on that?
Well, we'll probably talk about it in a couple minutes, but I also wanted to say, Janice pointed out that it's a great idea to document everything, including what isn't handled by management. I am a huge advocate for documenting everything. If it makes you even the slightest bit uncomfortable, just jot down the date, who was involved, and make sure that anything you write down is pretty neutral language. It isn't emotionally charged language.
Because it is foiable.
Yes.
And that is something to think about as if you're a new manager. I know when I first became a manager, I struggled with documentation because I thought I'd remember something. You're not going to remember the exact date, the time, the details if it's months later. So be sure to take that time to document. The conference host said another technique I've heard for jokes is to pretend you don't understand, asking, what do you mean? I don't get it. There's a meme about this. It is awesome because once the person has to explain it, they realize that that's not funny. Yes, I love that response in inappropriate jokes. Oh yeah. All right, I forgot the order of these slides, Emily. Okay, so a patron or coworker engages in a microaggression aimed at you. For example, asking a person of color if they're from this country. Emily,
you might have noticed I included this in this presentation twice because I'm really tired of answering it. I'm really tired of getting this from others. But feel free in the moment to say, you're making me feel uncomfortable, please stop. And always report if it's a patron, if it's a coworker. That's something else that a lot of these situations you might be getting from your coworkers as well. Just know that you can say, I'm actually not okay with that.
This is a good spot, actually, Emily, to point out some of the policy at the bottom where it says any misconduct that disturbs library users or staff or hinders others from using the library or library materials is prohibited. There is a high likelihood that this type of language is included somewhere in your policies and procedures for your library, your county, your entity.
And we got to hurry through some of these, but I do recommend looking at the chat if you're not already.
Janice, I'm sorry that happened to you. That's frustrating. Okay, a patron or coworker engages in a microaggression aimed at someone else.
Even if it's not about you, it's not directed toward you, it's not directed toward another person, but just saying something that you're not okay with, you can say that's not okay, please stop. And particularly when it comes to fellow staff members, when you report, you may be asked to serve as a witness to that incident, which is perfectly fine. We'll talk a little later about how to be not a bystander, but an upstander. But just know that if it makes you feel uncomfortable, just imagine what the other person that it's directed to would feel like, and just have that compassion to speak up.
And you'll notice we use please in a lot of these responses. So you're still being respectful, but you are standing up for yourself and others. Okay, so here's some added short types of phrases that some of these are very professionally driven in their content, but you can switch these up a little bit depending on your situation. So using comments like sweetheart, honey, baby, you can say, calling me sweetheart is demeaning to me as a professional. Please don't call me that again. You can say my marital status, appearance, personal life has no bearing on my ability to assist you in the library. You can say I'm happy to answer any questions about the library, but I'm not going to answer any questions about my personal life. This behavior continues, I'll ask someone else to finish assisting you. If this behavior continues, I'll ask you to leave the library. Notice how they escalate a little bit to the consequences. Some of these are a little wordier than others. You want to adapt them, use them in any way that you feel comfortable, but I highly encourage you to look through these and find one phrase, one of the simpler, shorter phrases, and adopt it and practice it. Say it in front of the mirror. I always thought that was weird, but the more I present, I talk in the mirror a lot more than I used to. It gets easier.
And something else I wanted to point out is a lot of people say, oh, well, I'm from the South. I didn't mean any harm by it. I just call everyone sweetie or something like that. I'm from the South as well. That's not an excuse. And you don't have to, be rude about it, of course, but just, well, my name is Emily. I prefer to be called Emily. And, just making sure to stand up for what you feel is right. Jessica did point out in the chat, what do you do when someone asks you why something is offensive? It's up to you if you want to have that conversation or not. You don't have to be the person who educates someone else. If, a lot of times for me, I will go into the educator kind of role because I do feel like they need to know, but then later think, well, you know, I shouldn't have had to be the one to say, this is why you're being offensive. So don't feel like you have to be. But let's see. Hang on, Sarah said something.
So this question also falls in line similarly with a conversation I've had often with many women in my life, where we have talked about how you don't have to justify your feelings to anyone. Your feelings are your feelings. If you feel something is offensive, you don't have to justify it. And you can say that to someone also, if you choose.
Sorry, Doris said, what if you know others are allowing this kind of conversation, but you won't? That's just another thing. That's a reason or a good place to use your I feel statements. I feel uncomfortable with this conversation happening right now. A lot of times patrons will want to just engage with us and relate to us, or even fellow coworkers. And they'll say something about, you know, maybe a group or something, and you don't agree with it. And so you say, well, that makes me feel uncomfortable. And then they say, well, why are you being so defensive? Why are you like that? Another great thing to say in one of these situations is if someone ever, right now for me, when someone asks a question that I don't immediately want to answer about a group to which I belong or identify with, I'll say, well, why do you ask? And just putting that out there forces them to think, oh, should I not have asked? What's going on? Or it allows them to dig the hole a little deeper for them. And it's a way of you seeking to understand why they're asking that without being defensive.
Thank you, Emily. This is where I will say I have learned so much from Emily as well. There are some comments here that I really appreciate. So Janan said it's important to be prepared to respond quickly, since hesitation may give the offender the sense that the door is open for further communication. So that is a very nice way of what I would say, shut it down. If it's not okay, shut it down. Thank you, Janet.
And what Anna said kind of leads into our next topic. So Anna said, if we see coworkers freeze, it may be helpful to step in and tell them they have a call in another room. We would do this a lot in the library sphere, just being very, in certain libraries I've worked in, being very aware, having situational awareness to what's happening around you, and would go up to someone if they were kind of looking around furtively, if they had been with a patron for a long time, going up to them and saying, hey, I do you have a chance? I have something, sorry to interrupt, but, and then you come up with a reason to get them out of that situation. Or if you are a witness or a bystander, again, make sure your situational awareness allows you to watch out for other people, people experiencing bullying or just, you know, uncomfortable situations. And patrons will come in and out, but you're always working with your colleagues. So you need to support them and hopefully be supported in return. Call out any bad behavior, watch for it in yourself, don't gossip. And there's a website called ihollaback.org. I think it's for teens. I just like saying it. They recommend being an upstander, standing up for someone. So not witnessing something, but in the moment saying something. And that could be as simple as, that makes me feel uncomfortable, or asking if someone needs to go into another room. Furthermore, a lot of organizations out there don't have policies against bullying or harassment. This is mentioned in the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi, where he says if your organization doesn't have a policy against racism, being actively anti-racist, then that's something you should advocate for and make sure that it's clear it's not going to be tolerated.
I'd like to back up to one comment, Emily, from our host that said, keep in mind when responding, we think of fight or flight, but freeze and fawn are also reactions. I have not heard that before, but that is, I understand that. And they said, don't feel like you failed if you freeze up. So practice helps. And I completely agree with that. And in response to Anna's comment about coworkers freezing and stepping in, the longer you work with your team and your coworkers, you develop relationships with these people where you know their body language and you will know when they're uncomfortable. You can come up with a code word or a little symbol behind their back, you know, I need help, wiggling my fingers. I have joked with colleagues in libraries where I'm relatively new afterwards to be like, thanks guys, I could have used some help. And then we would talk about like, how do we ask for help from our coworkers, but not let the customer know it's happening. I've gone out with particular customers that I know might be trying to engage in conversations that make employees uncomfortable, like, oh, so-and-so, it's time for your one-on-one. I didn't supervise that person, but the customer didn't know that. So I pulled them in the back and then they looked at me weird. I'm like, I thought you needed some help. And they so appreciated that. So if you were a manager and you were unsure, and even if you were wrong that time, your employees are going to remember that and they will appreciate it. And that example, modeling that behavior, will help them do it for their colleagues as well.
And that's similar to what Kathy suggested. If someone is at their desk, then you could always call them. I've done it before where I've called someone's cell phone, which was ringing in a different room. And so they had to leave the situation to go answer it. And then just said, I just thought you could use an out. You could also come up with a code word like, oh, hey, so sorry to interrupt, but Mr. Brown is on the phone for you. And he said it's very urgent. And that can just kind of stop that. And it's not necessarily if it's something that's harassing, but just making them feel uncomfortable. Sometimes you'll get patrons who just want to talk. That's their only outlet into the real world, especially nowadays. And, you know, just having that situational awareness and looking for your coworkers' body language, like Dana suggested, is so important to making sure they're feeling comfortable in their workspace.
And I'm so glad to see that several of you have thought about these things and you have things in place to help your colleagues. So I'm very encouraged to see that. Let's talk about our final tips. So crucial
your conversation skills.
We're going to talk over each other about crucial conversations because we believe everyone should read it and utilize it. And if you have a crucial conversation trained person locally in your area, ask for a training. Virtually works, in person someday maybe would be wonderful. But this book has been so helpful for us. We had our teams read it. I'm getting ready to go back and read it again because it's been a few years. But it is definitely wonderful. It gives you really solid, concrete examples and the process on how to navigate through them.
There's also another book that I forgot to mention on here, but it's called Life Script. And it gives you very clear situations about things you might encounter in your everyday life. For instance, if you're a supervisor, you have an employee who has an issue with hygiene. Or if you feel as though someone disrespected you in the workplace. Life scripts, I'll put it in the chat. But both of those have versions for different organizations and different levels of management. Yeah, Life Script, so good.
Crucial Conversations is a great book for new managers as well. New and more seasoned managers. So it's not just for conversations on how to respond to things that we're talking about today. It is a really great tool for performance management as well. So we've got about 9 minutes. So we're going to finish up our tips here. Please start putting some more of your questions in. We're happy to answer questions throughout. So if there are less at the end, that's okay too. So let's look at our final tips here. It's always good practice to file incident reports when you have situations you're uncomfortable with. This is all depending on your process in your county, but documentation is important either way, even if it is your own documentation that you save until it is needed, and then hopefully it's never needed.
That's something that I do. I keep a file on my computer for different direct reports, or anytime there's an incident, I will date it and keep it on my personal files. And if anything happens in the future, I can always refer back to it. Another reason it's good is for people who, even if you're not their supervisor, it's good to track patterns of behavior. So if there's a problem later with someone, you can say, well, on this date, we talked about it. On this date, we talked about it. They did this on this date. And that can make things easier when their supervisor's having a performance discussion with them.
And that's for customers as well. That's not just for your staff members. You can use that for customers so that you can explain to them, this behavior is continual if they are in denial about it. So moving on to the next tip here, if your supervisor is the one making you uncomfortable and you'd like to file a complaint, then you would want to go to their direct supervisor or to your human resources for your library or your entity, whether that's a county or a city. This is a situation where many people are uncomfortable with saying something because it's their supervisor. It doesn't matter the position or the level that that person is at, none of this is okay. And again, if that is the one thing that someone needs to hear today, I'm all about it.
And don't feel as though you have to, the reason this is here, don't feel as though you have to speak up and say something to someone else who makes you feel uncomfortable. A lot of times you'll hear something about how the victim shouldn't have to go re-traumatize themselves by going to the person. I don't like the term victim, but just know that there are options out there for you. And Dana said this multiple times about supervisors in particular wanting to back their employees up. So if you're uncomfortable, especially the first time, second time that something like this happens to you, or if a situation happened and later you think, well, I wonder if that was okay that this happened or what I said, just know that you should be able to go to your supervisor and get some support.
When I get to back my people up for this with customers, I suddenly feel like 6 feet tall. Guys, I'm like 5'3", and I feel like a little old lion when I get to, and I say that, when I get to support my team. I get to protect my team and I get to support them in my position. At the same time, I'm all about teaching them how to respond for themselves. But when it comes up that I'm the one who has to respond, I turn into a little bit of a mama bear. So, all right, last slide. Responding gets easier with practice. Practice in front of the mirror if you need to. I feel weird practicing in front of the mirror, but I do it because it works.
Something else, a lot of us, because I am definitely included in this, afterwards you'll think about, hey, this isn't cool, and you'll go and in the car on your way home think, you know what I should have said? I should have said this. And so like replaying that, even if it's not responding in the mirror where you have to look at yourself, and if it's like in the car, even just like repeating it in your head, all of that really does get easier when you practice. And anything that you've seen here today, even if it's not exactly what you would say, hopefully this will be a good guideline for how to craft your own sentences in the future, things that you can say in the future that you'll have in your back pocket. So when something happens, you can just say, I feel uncomfortable right now. And then maybe just give yourself a little space to determine a next move.
Now, I did realize we do not have a contact slide, Emily.
Well, we developed this originally. Yeah, we created this originally so that we could, it was internal for staff day, so we just didn't think about it. And I still use this whenever I'm training a new staff member, we go over this and say, look, this might happen. This is worst case scenario, but it's happened before. And just know that you can speak up. I mean, the best thing about this is how it confirms and informs staff members about things that could happen, and lets them know that there are options.
So I threw my email in the chat. If anyone has any questions, be happy to respond. If you want to talk further about anything, we'd be more than happy to. I don't see any more questions. Too fast. Hold on. Rochelle, the hygiene process, I believe Emily said the Life Scripts book mentions that. There's also Ask the Manager, which is, her last name's Green, I believe. someone correct me, I'm sure everyone's read Ask a Manager, but Ask a Manager mentions that as well. And she has a book and a website and a podcast, I believe.
Okay, I do want to point out this question from Myrna. What do you do if HR backs a supervisor in the situation where the supervisor is in the wrong? And there's this one situation where they backed a supervisor that was being racist to one of their employees. It was documented, other people, but HR decided not to speak up. There are organizations that exist that you can file complaints and claims to. Just know that if you're in an organization where HR isn't supporting you, likely you're not going to get anywhere in pursuing that.
Like you're in the wrong organization and you deserve to work somewhere else.
You deserve to work somewhere where that's not going to be a given. And Megan also mentioned, I wish when I was getting my MLS, they had talked about setting boundaries. Definitely. Another thing that I do want to point out is many people in the library world identify as female, and as such are subject to certain expectations against them or of them. And even if it's not natural to you, just know that you can please speak up. It's something that, like we say, it gets easier.
I will mention for the boundaries comment, the creator of Whole30, Dr. Nicole LaPera, has a podcast and a blog about many, many things. But one of the things that she discusses, I believe it's I looked it up, episode 11 is about setting boundaries, and it's excellent. So you might find those professional development resources in many different places. Who would have thought you could get a boundaries conversation from the creator of a diet plan? So that's Nicole LaPera. All right, everyone, I think we are about at the 1 minute mark. We might have time for one more question.
Yeah, sad to know other libraries are going through same kinds of issues. But another thing is just speaking up about it and being honest about it with fellow colleagues. You're surprising it's surprising how many people have had similar experiences. Don't feel like this is something to be ashamed of or anything. Please speak up.
And we all serve the public. So you never know who you have